In what's being described as one of the largest immigration enforcement actions in Vermont's recent history, U.S. Customs and Border Protection agents arrested and detained 8 workers at a Berkshire dairy farm this week.
We're concerned for our people. And when I say our people, I mean all of them.
They are part of their community, part of their families. Their kids are in school, and they're essential. So that is the part of it that is, disturbing for a lot of us.
Plus, Vermont Senator Peter Welch meets with Mohsen Mahdawi in prison as advocates rally to show their support. And lawmakers hammer out the details of a new housing proposal aimed at spurring development in small towns. All that and more ahead on Vermont This Week.
From the Vermont Public Studio in Winooski, this is Vermont This Week. Made possible in part by the Lintilac Foundation and Milne Travel. Here's moderator Mitch Wertlieb.
Thanks for joining us on Vermont This Week. I'm Mitch Wertlieb. It's Friday, April 25th. And joining us on the panel this week, Calvin Cutler from WCAX, Carly Berlin from Vermont Public and VTDigger, and Colin Flanders from 7 Days. Thank you all so much for being here. And as usual, there is no shortage of news to talk about. As I mentioned at the top, 8 migrant farm workers were arrested at the largest dairy farm in Vermont, Berkshire Dairy. Let's hear first from Governor Scott and Will Lembeck of Migrant Justice about what happened.
While I believe those who are here illegally and are committing serious crimes should be detained, I don't believe we should be targeting those who are here peacefully because they're our neighbors and friends, have kids in our schools, shop at our businesses, and play an important role in our economy and workforce.
People have set down roots in Vermont. They've made this state their home. They know how important their community is to the state of Vermont and how much they contribute. And they aren't willing to go back into the shadows or to go backwards. Workers have fought hard to win respect for their human rights, and they aren't going anywhere.
Okay, Colin Flanders, let's start off with what happened here. How did this mass arrest happen, and where's it leading?
Yeah, so according to Border Patrol, what happened here was they got a tip on Monday that there were 2 men walking through the woods with backpacks. They crossed through a cornfield and then ended up on private farmland. So the Border Patrol agents responded, apprehended one of the individuals, the other ran off. And in the midst of that, Border Patrol says that it found other people whose legal status was in question here, rounded them up, and that's these 8 farm workers who were arrested. The big question immediately after this was this a raid? Was this a targeted raid on a dairy farm, which would have wide-ranging ramifications in a state whose dairy industry relies heavily on such a workforce? The way that Border Patrol is describing this is a little different. This is sort of fitting into the playbook that we're seeing out of the Trump administration of trying to gin up the immigration arrest numbers, whereas they are just called collateral arrests, where they're essentially just going into some place under the guise of a warrant or a tip and then looking around and seeing who do we find. And so I think the big question is this a sign of more to come? Are we going to see this at other dairy farms, or is this maybe a one-off? And unfortunately, this farm and the workers kind of got unlucky in this case.
Calvin, this is a very big farm, as I said, the largest dairy farm in Vermont. What have the owners been saying about all this?
Yeah, so this is a Pleasant Valley farm. It's a huge farm, one of the biggest in the state in Berkshire. They've got over 15,000 heads of cattle. The family put out a statement after these arrests happened, basically saying that these 8 individuals that were on their farm more or less were hired using within the context of state and federal employment legal guidelines, which we followed up with the governor and Agriculture Secretary Anson Tebbetts, and they said they couldn't comment or weren't quite sure what they meant by that. So it is still unclear, but Border Patrol is saying that these 8 individuals are undocumented and here illegally. And, to Colin's point too, just a little earlier, talking about how heavily reliant, this state is on migrant farm workers. The reason that dairy farms have to turn to undocumented or illegal workers is because there is no visa that supports people here year-round. It's not like our people that come to pick apples or come work ski lifts or other jobs, seasonal jobs. Cows need to be milked 24/7. And because of that, we've had to turn to this type of labor. Plus, the starting wages are around $16 or so, Governor Scott says, and it's just been really tough to get people to actually work, Vermonters to work and sign up for these jobs. So the question is also, Colin alluded to, does this represent a broader pattern? Does this represent a policy shift from the Trump administration, who originally said we're going to be going after violent criminals here illegally with a criminal record? We don't know all of the details of these individuals, but certainly this is something that state leaders are keeping an eye on.
Yeah, and you heard Governor Scott make that distinction too, where he believes that if people are engaging in criminal acts and they're not here legally, of course, he thinks they should go, but that does, we don't know what the situation is here with these folks. But what I'm wondering is, as we said, this is a large dairy farm. Are there owners of much smaller dairy farms who also rely on some of these workers who are looking and say, okay, we can't afford to lose 8 people on our farm. There's no way we can survive.
Yeah, I mean, in talking with lawmakers, talking with lobbyists, people that really are very plugged into many dairy farms, there is a real sense of fear among farms, both large and small. Historically, I think Will Lambeck from Migrant Justice there, said living in the shadows, right? Historically, Vermont farms, we rely on this workforce, and we've sort of turned a blind eye to them and sort of let it fly under the radar. But if there is more enforcement, if there is, no matter what size farm, large or small, that could have a huge impact on our state's economy.
And Colin, as you were saying, this was not a raid in the sense that we've seen some other things, and we're going to get into that. But again, this is the largest arrest in recent memory, right?
Yeah. I think the last time that there was a work site enforcement action of this size was back in 2018 on a construction site. I think that, the big outstanding question remains, is this going to happen again? And I will say, it does seem, if this is a sort of shift in the Trump administration's policy, it's a pretty dramatic shift where Trump's borders are, Tom Homan, who has actually ties to the North Country, has been saying for months now that they are not going to be targeting dairy farms. And just last month, there was another one of these collateral type arrests on a dairy farm in the North Country where he came out immediately and said this was not a raid. We were going after somebody on the farm and these people just so happened to be around. I think the question is, is this going to become more common? And if so, what are farms going to do about it?
Yeah, already a lot of pressures on Vermont farmers dealing with things like tariffs and so much more. This certainly isn't going to make anything any easier in that sense. Carly Berlin, I want to turn to you now. Vermont lawmakers have been considering a housing discrimination bill, and we've been hearing about that. It's sort of been in flux. Where do things stand now?
Yeah, so this bill looks at expanding housing access for immigrants who don't have legal status. It would do this in 2 ways. It would add citizenship and immigration status to Vermont's fair housing laws. So basically saying it would prohibit discrimination on those grounds when someone's looking to rent or buy a home here. And it would also prohibit landlords for asking for a social security number when someone is putting out an apartment for rent. To tie this to the dairy farm conversation, one individual who's affiliated with Migrant Justice came and testified in support of this bill and said, he used to work on a dairy farm where housing was provided. When he left and tried to find somewhere else to live, every landlord would ask, okay, what's your social security number so I could run a credit and background check. And so it took him years to be able to find an apartment, and ultimately he had to have a coworker, act as a guarantor on his lease in order to just find somewhere to live. So what this bill is seeking to do is to, expand that access.
And where do things stand with it? Is there a lot of support for it? What are the chances?
Yeah, I mean, this bill is in the House Housing Committee right now. They're looking at possible changes to it. They've gotten some pushback on the Social Security number piece in particular from the Landlord Association saying, we really need this information to be able to properly vet tenants. So lawmakers right now are tinkering with some changes, some possible amendments, but it is still a live bill.
I will say, and I'm glad you brought up this bill and everything that's happening at the State House too. I know last week we focused a lot on pieces of legislation that the Judiciary Committee is working on, also discussions about the state of Vermont, our corrections and our contract with ICE. This point in the legislative session, the marching orders at the beginning were, property taxes, education, housing. But really, if you sit down in committees and you can feel it and you can see it in the hallways, there is a real response, and people are talking about what should Vermont's response to actions from the federal government might be. Not just in terms of the immigration conversation, but also potential cuts from DOGE, from whatever Medicaid package comes out of the federal government. So just to broaden it out a little bit, it's been really fascinating to see the priorities of state lawmakers shift to this at this point in the session.
Well, to that point, Calvin, another story where people are starting to pay a lot of attention, coming out and showing their displeasure with things. And this is the case of an individual here. We talk about these 8 migrants who were arrested. We don't really know their names or details yet, but we do know about Mohsen Mahdawi, who was arrested when he was going to fill out some naturalization papers. Colin, I know you've covered this as well. And then, his cause has really been rallied around. Senator Peter Welch met with Mahdawi recently in prison to show his support. You can see we have on the screen here for those who are watching what Peter Welch tweeted about that, and meeting with him and letting him know how things are. Folks have come out this week in support, rallying for his freedom. They say he was wrongly arrested. And we heard also from Mohsen Mahdawi's lawyer, Cyrus Mehta, who was reading something that he had tweeted. And let's hear what she had to say. These are his words.
I am in prison, but I'm not imprisoned. A system of democracy guarantees freedom of speech. Keep the hope alive. I will see you under the sun.
Powerful words. My mistake, by the way, that the male lawyer, Cyrus Mehta, for Mohsen Mahdawi. Let's start with you, Colin. I mean, what is happening here? Is this a situation where this person doesn't know what the next move is, whether they're going to be able to stay where they are, and what are people saying about his status now?
Yeah, so the big question in his case, like many others going on right now, is whether he is going to be detained while his immigration case plays out. Right now, he's challenging his arrest on constitutional grounds that the only reason he was targeted is because of his protected speech. And so far, the government has provided absolutely no evidence to suggest that otherwise. So on Wednesday, there was a court hearing. There was another large protest outside of the Burlington courthouse. There are a lot of eyes on this case. I got there at 8:15. The court hearing didn't start till 9, and I barely got into the courtroom. I was in an overflow room, and they cut it off right after me. And there's a lot of people paying attention to this case, not only because of his particular case, but because this has wide-ranging ramifications across the country. And his attorney made that point that there are 1 million international students across the U.S. who are right now watching and wondering whether they are going to be detained and potentially deported because they are speaking out. And it has had a chilling effect across college campuses. So right now, the question, we're going to have another hearing next Wednesday, and the judge may decide whether or not to release Mahdawi while his case plays out. If he doesn't, I mean, he could be in prison for months while his case plays out.
And Calvin, yes, in prison, but perhaps luckily not somewhere else.
Yeah.
He was almost on a plane. Tell us what happened there.
Yeah, I mean, basically, as the reporting goes, so he was detained in Colchester. They brought him to the airport. Evidently, in court, they said he wasn't feeling well. He went to the bathroom. They missed the flight. And while they were waiting for a new flight to come in from Burlington International, then that's when the order from the judge came down saying, keep him here in Vermont. And it is a little interesting, too, as we were just talking about the Vermont's contract with ICE and correctional facilities. There's a push at the State House to not work with ICE and hold federal detainees here. Right. He's also here in Vermont, closer to his lawyers, closer to his home community in the Upper Valley. So it is kind of an interesting dichotomy there.
And it was Louisiana where he was going to be taken to before missing that flight, right?
Exactly, yeah.
Okay, well, this brings us to another case where there was a woman who was, and this has made national, international news. She was taken off the streets of Massachusetts into a van, taken to Vermont, then to Louisiana. And we're talking about, the Rameza Ozturk, right? So what is the latest with her situation, Colin? Like, she has been ordered back to Vermont. Is she going to come back to Vermont?
Yeah, all indications at this point are showing that she is going to come back to Vermont. So late Friday last week, a federal judge ruled that she needs to be brought back up to Vermont while her case plays out here. And this is, again, her case challenging her arrest on constitutional grounds. I mean, what we're seeing here is a very clear playbook from the Trump administration where they're rounding people up and trying to ship them down to Louisiana as quickly as possible because they are, according to the attorneys who are representing these people, they're essentially venue shopping. They're looking for a court, an appeals court that will be sympathetic to their case. There was a legal victory for Rumesa's team to bring her back up to Vermont where her case is now going to be heard. There's a bail hearing on May 9th, and they are making the same determination. Should she be imprisoned while her immigration plays out? And her attorneys say absolutely not, that she does not pose a flight risk, that she does not pose a threat, that the only evidence the government has shown to date is that she wrote an op-ed in a campus newspaper. And so these cases are just strikingly similar, and we're seeing them across the country now. And it is a very clear playbook from the Trump administration to crack down on what many people see as constitutionally protected speech.
I mean, this is what's chilling here, because if you look at certain media outlets will describe this case and say, well, she's a supporter of Hamas, talking about Ozturk here. There is nothing in the op-ed that I've read that has any actual support for Hamas. She was being critical of Israel in the war against Hamas. But to make that leap, and then again, what is Mohsen Mahdawi? What is he being accused of? Let's remind people again, why was he detained to begin with?
So he has been detained. The Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, has essentially said that a lot of these visas are being canceled because these students are speaking and acting in a way that could jeopardize U.S. foreign policy. I think there are a lot of people who view that as a stretch. I mean, Mohsen, there's been reporting on the New York Times. He was very active on Columbia's university pro-Palestine movement up until about 2024, but he had stepped away from those activities in the lead up to the high-profile encampments that we saw sweep across the U.S. And so I think there is a lot of concern about what exactly have these students done. And it's not just them. I mean, I think we should keep in mind there are more than 1,500 student visas that have been canceled in the last few weeks across more than 200 college campuses. And in some cases, the students are only finding out after their universities are refreshing this federal database that shows the status of their visa, and they have no idea why their visa has been canceled. Some, by all accounts, have not even participated in protests. And so I think it is the randomness, which is really contributing to this feeling that if you're here on a visa, your status could be in jeopardy at any moment, and I think that's a really scary place to be.
Yeah, it's the chaotic nature of it. And of course, we're going to be talking about this, I am sure, in the weeks to come. This is an issue not going away with these cases and others that could come up. I want to turn now to housing, because this is something we talk about a lot, Carla, as you know, and we're so glad to have you here because you cover this especially. There's a proposal to spur development in small towns in Vermont. I think that would be welcome. What are folks saying about this?
Yeah, so this would create a new program, the Community and Housing Infrastructure Program, or CHIP. It's basically a smaller version of the TIF program that folks might be familiar with, tax increment financing. That concept lets municipalities borrow money to build public infrastructure, water, sewer systems, roads in an area where they want to see growth, with the expectation that that'll then bring new private development. Then the tax revenue from the development pays off the debt for the infrastructure. Idea with CHIP is, only bigger municipalities have been able to take advantage of TIF.
Sure.
So why don't we have a program where it says, okay, you want to build this one apartment building, for example, one property, use that same tax increment financing concept there. So that's the aim.
Just call it CHIP instead of TIF.
Exactly.
And let's do something, because it seems like at this point, it's like we just need the housing and we need more of it, and any way we can get it, that's part of what's behind this.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the idea here is let's allow smaller towns to grow their grand lists and have another tool at their disposal to be able to fund the just basic infrastructure that's needed to be able to build new housing.
Yeah, I mean, when I talk with people at the State House, they're saying this is one of the most important pieces of the housing puzzle this year. I mean, a couple of years ago, we did local zoning to make it more permissive. or inclusive, that is. Last year, we started a process to reevaluate Act 250 jurisdiction, and there's sort of this mapping process that's happening, very complicated, but this is sort of the next piece, and especially helping developers, both public and private, build out infrastructure, water, sewer, electric, et cetera. And that really, they say will help bring down the cost to try to make some of these projects pencil out. Because when you talk about the pressures on building housing, labor, lending, lumber for home construction, cost of materials, inflation, tariffs, there's a lot of things we can't control, but they say this is one of the things we can control. And so there is definitely some momentum for it. We'll see how the Ways and Means Committee and sort of how sort of the committees of jurisdiction feel about it.
And of course, anytime we talk about housing, we have to bring up the subject of homelessness because these go hand in hand, unfortunately. Carly, there's a plan to overhaul the state's response to homelessness. What's behind that plan?
Yeah, this is a really big overhaul that's contemplated here. So basically, this bill, H91, it would dissolve the statewide motel voucher program as it currently exists, not this coming fiscal year that starts this summer, but the next one, and basically give the funding and decision-making power over the state's homelessness response over to these 5 regional anti-poverty nonprofit organizations. So that's, Champlain Valley Office of Economic Opportunity in this area, Capstone, and on and on. This is a huge shift, right? Because right now, the state is really the central actor in how Vermont responds to homelessness. Obviously, they run the motel program, but also they give out the grants to local shelters to, be built or to run their operations. What this bill contemplates is saying, no, let's actually have a lot of that decision-making happen at the regional level.
Is it fair to say Governor Scott's a fan of this? Because I know he's not a fan of the motel voucher program.
Right. So in concept, so what the administration has said is they like the idea of this shift of having this more regional, local approach. Obviously there are concerns about spending levels, and they're, if anything, interested in speeding up the implementation of this a little bit sooner, while the groups that would be carrying this out are saying, actually, we need a little bit more time, we're on board, but give us another year to really hammer out some of these details.
And what's the status of where all this is, what are we looking for a timeline here? If there's any?
I mean, this bill has passed the House. It now is sitting in a Senate committee. They're taking lots of testimony, looking at, possible tweaks here, but it seems to have momentum. It's gotten a lot of attention, and I should say too that it's also gotten a lot of criticism. There's a concern that this basically amounts to the state walking away from its responsibility for responding to homelessness in the state. There is, the state, as the bill currently envisions, would play an oversight function here, but some critics are saying, that's maybe not quite enough. The state is the one that can kind of see the whole picture, and even some local shelter providers have said, this really complicates things and destabilizes our system right at the moment when we might be losing a lot of federal funding. So concerns too.
Again, the unknowns are just unbelievable here, which brings us to healthcare, everybody's other favorite topic. Nothing ever goes wrong there. I'm not trying to make light of this. We have a serious actual problem here. In a joint meeting of the Senate and House healthcare committees this week, the Green Mountain Care Board said $200 million in healthcare system savings is needed in order to avoid a 4th consecutive year of double-digit increases. This is on Blue Cross Blue Shield insurance premiums, BCBS being the largest health insurer in the state. So, Calvin, $200 million, where's that going to come from? What's the time frame for making those savings? Is it even possible?
Yeah, they said within the next 4 months before the next fiscal year, $200 million, that's going to be a really heavy lift. I don't think anybody is saying that that's actually achievable, but it just really does go to show just how deep of a hole we're in and how large the both affordability crisis is for Vermonters, but also the hospital budget sustainability crisis is as well. There's several things that are going on at once. They mentioned we need to save this money to prevent these potentially huge increases, which will fall on Vermonters and on small businesses. And when that happens, you might have people either cut back their benefits or be cost burdened. So that's the affordability side. On the hospital side, during that hearing, there were also CEOs from Gifford, from North Country, from a few others that are doing some of this sustainability work to try to bring down their expenses and to try to make their budgets pencil out. Their big message to state lawmakers was, we're working on it. We see it, we hear, we understand the crisis that we're in, but you can't trim $10 million overnight at some of these small rural hospitals. And Jessica Holmes with the Green Mountain Care Board told me that basically we're now in this spot where there is a broad sort of recognition that 14 full-service hospitals across the state of Vermont in a state with a declining and aging population using more frequent and more expensive care, that's a really, really tough prospect to have play out. So we'll see where we go from here, but yeah, buckle up because it's going to be another probably tough year for insurance rates.
Yeah, and if you're wondering about those insurance rates and saying, telling BCBS, well, sorry, we're not accepting that, they're too big to fail. I mean, it's a third of Vermonters they're insuring there. So there's no easy way out of this. I do want to quickly ask all of you, when is stick season? Because I've gotten different opinions about this. My feeling is once April ends, stick season is over. Calvin, what do you think?
I think it's sometime between late February, early April, sort of mid-April, until really the leaves come out, sort of, umbrella, mud season's in there as well.
Carly?
So I thought stick season was in the fall after the leaves all fall down, but before the snow. So I might be totally wrong. I'm pretty new here.
Different opinion,
I'm
Colin?
going to research it and get
Okay, you'll get back to us and we'll talk about it perhaps in a future show. That's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much to our panel. Calvin Cutler from WCAX, Carly Berlin from Vermont Public, VTDigger, and Colin Flanders from 7 Days. I'm Mitch Wertlieb. Thank you so much for listening and for watching this week. Hope you'll join us again next week for Vermont This Week.